Warning: the following broadcast is not approved by your teacher, university, politician, or government. Side effects may include skepticism, better reasoning skills, liberty, peace, and an escape from the woke.
Welcome to the show. What's up, everybody? Welcome to a new episode of the Been Awake podcast for better sense making. I'm your host, LB Muniz. You already know where to go, but if you don't, go to beenawake.com, subscribe with your email address. Let me know the types of topics you want to talk about on this show. Yes, if you're watching the video, this is another car episode. I wanted to opine and wax a little long on this group of people that in my head, and if you've listened to interviews with me, and I think I've written about it maybe once or twice, that I've talked about a few times, and this group is called, I entitle the disaffected liberal. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. I've got a few posts here from X, couple of videos that I'm going to play. We're going to kind of react to different concepts that are coming into the fore. And this is important because this is very much what's underneath the surface, bubbling up, if you will, in modern politics here in America and arguably across the world as well. So let's break down a little bit about what I mean. If you've listened to other episodes, you know that, and if you listen to anybody who talks about politics, you know they talk a lot about the left and the right. I think those are, at their core, they're contextual terms. They can be defined, and I've often defined leftism as, I've taken Charles Haywood's definition, which is maximal egalitarianism, maximal liberation. The right, by contrast, is that which opposes it, that is to say, a recognition of hierarchy. You don't even have to advocate for the hierarchy that exists currently. That's going to be part of what we discuss as well. You don't have to advocate the hierarchy that exists. You just have to recognize that there is, in fact, an inherent hierarchy to existence. Some people are better suited to a given task than others, and that would also include the running of society, in that we're talking about politics here. So that's the left and the right. Liberalism is I would argue is some kind of an encompassing idea. It might be flawed. It might not work. It might end up in communism. Whatever we can, I would perhaps better. That's a conversation better saved to. That's perhaps better saved to a conversation with the person. But I would argue, for the purposes of our discussion, that liberalism is an encompassing idea. Right? It is a complete circle. That is to say, there is both a left and a right found within that. And liberalism, well, gosh, I may as well just go ahead and pull up a definition, if I could be so bold. But it's kind of like that old adage of, like, if you ask a fish what it means to be wet, he'll kind of look at you crazy, because that's what he is. Like, a fish is always wet because he's underwater. Yes, I know that's one of those debates people have. I think it's kind of silly. Liberalism is a political and moral philosophy based on the rights of the individual, consent of the governed, political equality, the right to private property, and equality before the law, or so says Wikipedia. If we could also say that, let's see, what is the fundamental liberal ideas of freedom of the press, freedom of religion, the separation of church and state, the right to due process, and equality before the law are widely accepted as common foundations of liberalism. I think that these definitions that I've given have more to do with where liberalism was and not where it is today. That being said, I think a lot of people, whether they call themselves conservatives or liberals, in the vast majority of people, I think that people in these worlds are, how would you say this? They are, I think they adhere to that. And of course, looking at it just on the face, who wouldn't want to have some sort of equality before the law? The mistake there comes thinking that we can make everything equal, I would argue. And that's where the leftist impulse plays into the liberalism to push it a certain direction. And at every single step, because of the emphasis that liberalism has on the individual, right? So as long as you can prove that one person feels this way, it must be taken as gospel of a kind. because of that impetus of the focus on the individual. These are arguments, by the way, that I find it interesting to hear myself make in real time. But because of that emphasis on the individual, things tend to always fall in one direction, which is to break down barriers, not in a good way, and to remove the duties and obligations of the person to a broader society, and so too the duties of the people at the top of that society to the people below, if you will. So liberalism is what we are all raised in. We are all in, whether you want to admit it or not. You could be the most based guy out there on the internet. You are still heavily influenced by the liberal tradition. We all are. It's kind of impossible not to be at this point in history. You might be reacting against it, but you are still, in fact, largely influenced by it. So for the purposes of our conversation, I want to focus on, we're focused here not on the fringes, but on the mainstream. We're focused on that mushy center of people who think that democracy works for them. And that as long as I vote, everything is going to be okay, because that's what that's the best system of government that exists. I don't have final answers on these sorts of things, by the way. I know some people will say, well, there should be no government, or there should be a monarchy, there should be some kind of thing. I'm more concerned, and this is the intricacy of this project versus everything else you're going to hear. I'm more concerned about having things make sense to you so that you can better navigate your own choices and decisions in the world than I am with putting forward a positive, in the sense that I'm positing, POSIT, something positive worldview. I'm not here to spread any ideology besides what I call here better sense making, which is to say, let's apply some principles of skepticism to really give a rigorous analysis to the things that we take for granted as people within a society, because those things always exist. There has always been, because we are social creatures, there has always been the individual and society. A friend of mine, Andrew, said it once on a podcast I did on his stream, where he said, sovereignty lies within the relationship. And I'm like, holy cow, that helps everything fall into place, right? I don't think it's an accident that we tend to talk about things, and that I talk about things in terms of trinities, because the state of nature is a binary, right? You either are going to eat or you're not going to eat. You're either going to live or you're going to die. The state of nature is a binary, but society is something more. It's something different. Right, this thing we called culture is more. It's different. It expounds. It gives more to this state of being, to our lives, than just merely waking up and figuring out where our next meal is coming from. So the state of nature. So a binary is not sovereignty. There could be really no sovereignty within a binary. Sovereignty lies within the relationship, which is to say, there is one thing, there is another, and there is a third thing binding it. At least in terms for a quick conversation today. So this belief in individual rights, this belief in private property, which I actually think is a good one. All of these beliefs are amalgamated into this thought process we have and we call liberalism. So why is it the case then that not everybody in our society calls themselves a liberal? There are all these people out there who call themselves conservatives. A lot of people that I tend to agree with. A lot of people call me a conservative in popular discourse, right? In my everyday life, when I'm talking to somebody in the course of my main hustle, the thing that makes me money in sales is, if I get to know somebody on a more personal level, it's like, oh, well, here's LB. He's like a super conservative, right? That's what some of these people will call me sometimes. So why is but these people call themselves conservatives? Well, I think that's because they're a conservative liberal. So they're trying to hold on to this definition that I just brought up in front of us. They're trying to hold on to these fundamental ideas like individual freedom, the idea that I can worship as I choose, I can live a life that I want to live as long as I don't infringe upon the rights and beliefs of other people. Sounds like a great proposition. there's a thinker out there that you may or may not be familiar with named Curtis Yarvin. Formerly, he wrote under the pen name Mencius Moldbug for a while. And it was one of the first interviews that I heard with him where he talked about the problem of liberalism. He said the problem of liberalism is like it's trying to hold up this massive sharpened pencil. Right? If you think about like a pencil that, let's see, do I have a pen? I should have a pen here somewhere next to me. So if you're watching the video, but if you're just listening to the audio, just think about a pen or a pencil, right? It's like, cylindrical, but then it comes down to a point. And that point, and he said liberalism is like trying to balance that pen or pencil on its point. And it's really, really tough to do because it's not a solid base. So you need a lot of support on both sides to hold it up. So in terms of how we're conceptualizing things here, you can argue that, okay, well, as long as you have a left-wing contingent of people and a right-wing contingent of people who want to both hold up this pencil we're calling liberalism, things will be okay. Unfortunately, I don't think that is where particularly left-wing people want to go. So there's a lot of people out there who call themselves conservatives who are trying to hold true to this traditional and original conception of liberalism. So they're trying to hold up this pencil on one side where the rest of the people on the left have already progressed quite literally into what we call progressives. Now, they don't fall just into the realm of progressives. They also call themselves socialists, communists, so on and so forth. The woke we might talk about here a little bit now and then. So these people will take on all of these names unto themselves, and they are deviations. They are they're deviations, but they are not removing themselves from the original core of a liberal understanding. Because like I said, as long as one person can think it, it must be so because of the commitment to individualism. I say this as somebody who called himself an individualist for a long period of time. I don't necessarily put myself in a collectivist vein. In fact, what I'm trying to point out and what I said here already is that it's actually about the relationship. So it's about the relationship between the individuals to society. And I've been saying that for as long as I've been talking about politics and philosophy. It's not the binary of individualism, philosophy, right? Or individualism, collectivism. Those are conjugations. Those are, what's the word I'm trying to say? Not conjugations. Those are phantasms produced by 20th century and 19th century thinkers who themselves benefited from a great mass of human and social capital that was built over a generation, over generations, over millennia, we might say. So going back, it's 2024 as I'm recording this. If we go back like 10 years, I think that's when things really started to run away from us, if you will, in the political landscape. The conversation changed considerably. We weren't talking about taxes or what the proper tax rate was for society. Instead, we started talking about things like racism, institutional and otherwise. We started talking about things like identity, sexual identity, what should be taught to children. The conversation really shifted. It was pushed in a particular direction by a particular set of people. And that caused a lot of people to be like, hang on. What is this thing that we're trying to all hold up here together? Why are you saying something that sounds so much different than what I believe and what I thought we had all already agreed to? So if you will, there are still a lot of people trying to hold up this pencil of liberalism. And there are some of us who have said, maybe we have to let it fall. It doesn't mean we have to give up I don't think it means we have to give up things that are better about the system per se. I think it just means we have to be imaginative and take the best aspects of humanity and not reject tradition and reject the foundational roots of human culture and human religion and so on and so forth. A lot of these types of people came to be called around this time frame of 2014 through 2016. Of course, this was amplified and accelerated by the election of Donald Trump, amplified and accelerated by the COVID-19 lockdown pandemics, and it's certainly going to be amplified and accelerated by the 2024 election as well. I think you could argue, well, maybe it's just run its course. know. Well, the future is yet to be written. I'm just trying to give you an understanding of a particular set of group of people that I think you need to watch out for. And I'm going to tell you that some of these people are people that I would agree with on many topics, and I think they get a lot of the diagnoses correct, but I think their prescriptions are wrong. And in short, I think their prescriptions are wrong because they think we should go back to 1995, if you will. They think that was the best human beings our society or civilization could have ever hoped to reach. And it doesn't follow from that I think the people who think we should go back to 1955 or 1915 have the better sense. I think they're both wrong. And I think they're both wrong because you can't go back. Time only moves in one direction. Tradition is not static. In fact, it's actually a very dynamic source. It is the false presentation of tradition as this old and stodgy thing that clouds our thinking and disenables us to actually find the path forward. Because the path forward is not clear the way it is elsewhere. So a lot of these people came about in what was referred to as the IDW or intellectual dark web. And again, a lot of these are people who I like and who I agree with, but I want to show you where I think they're going wrong. And that's why I'm calling them, and that's why I call them the disaffected lib, because they're still liberal. They still hold true to all the tenets of liberalism. They're just disaffected with the current state of affairs. They're like, hang on, this liberalism thing is pretty good, but we don't want this radical progressive politics. They, in many cases, will even still agree with a radical progressive, with a progressive politics, just not the particular radical progressive politics that's being put forth by the gender ideologues, the racial ideologues, the woke, these people that we call the woke, right? These people who literally believe in an inverted hierarchy. It is not the case that they actually want the hierarchy to not exist. They just simply want to invert it, because by inverting it, it becomes, well, I would argue bad, but they would argue good. There's a few people we're going to talk about. Let's start with somebody who, I'll be honest, I don't care for. Bill Maher. Bill Maher is this, he's been a talking head for a long period of time. And, one of the things I think, listen, I'm not saying that people can't change their minds. It's not what I'm saying here. What I am saying is that people who talk for a living should be held to account when they clearly go against what they've said in the past. And so I have this little video here. Apparently this was Bill Maher recently, and he's saying he thinks we've crossed a Rubicon. Let's listen.
Now can I talk about American propaganda? Because there was a rally in Dearborn, Michigan. It's a large Muslim population. Chant of death to America. I feel like we've passed something here. The left has gotten mad at me for many years for talking about Islam. I try not to do it too much because I know it makes them go crazy, and I've made my point. But it needs to be talked about now. When you start chanting death to America in America, I got it, Charlottesville was real bad when they were chanting death to the Jews will not replace us. But on American soil, here's the Tarek Bazi is the organizer of this. This was at the end of Ramadan, International Day of Quds, Al-Quds, which was pronounced originally by, he said, this is why Imam Khomeini, that's the Ayatollah Khomeini. Remember him, yep. The Ayatollah Khomeini? He's the good guy now. Khomeini, he would say to pour all your chants and all of your shouts upon the head of America. Yeah, I heard this before. Not coming from America, but the great chastisement. We will chastise the infidels. But now it's coming from inside America. Sorry, got to talk about this again. He said, we live in one of the rottenest countries that ever existed on earth. It's not just genocide, Joe, that has to go. It's the entire system that has to go. No, it doesn't. I like our system. This is America, for crying out loud.
Well, what about...
And there are people who see me say this, oh, he's a conservative now. I'm a conservative. I have not changed. I always liked America and thought death through it was bad.
All right, so Bill Maher doing Bill Maher things, talking about these things and the way that it goes. he's very upset that there's a lot of anti-American protests happening right now in the United States, largely influenced by what's going on in the Middle East, the current conflict between Israel and Palestine. But if you're wondering what my position on that is, I sincerely think neither party involved has demonstrated an ability to seek or craft peace for their people and for their constituency, the consent of the governed, all that liberal stuff that we were talking about before. And so I think perhaps it might make sense to give it over to a different jurisdiction. And I think maybe that jurisdiction should be Catholicism. We have just as much of a claim as Catholics to the holy city of Jerusalem as anyone else. And it would probably be better if the Pope was in charge of it than warring factions of Jews and Palestinians. Yes, that's a very controversial position. I understand that. I'm just gonna kind of throw that bomb out there. I'm not gonna break it down for you at the moment. But if you're somebody caught into the normal thing, you might be like, "This guy's crazy." I might be crazy, but gosh, I don't see another direction out of this that actually solves anything. And I'm certainly not going to take either side in a conflict that is millennia in the making, other than the side that I already agree with, as the case may be. So that was Bill Maher in 2024. I don't know exactly when that clip aired. According to my thing, it was a few days ago. And one of the other tenets, certainly of modern liberalism, and certainly in that it's talked about amongst progressives, of which Bill Maher, I think, counts himself a member of. Even if he's not one of the radicals, right? He's still definitely of that milieu, is unfettered immigration. The idea that anybody can travel to anywhere at any point in time for any reason and go and live in that country. Of course, in practice, what that means is a lot of people come here to a country like America, even people who don't believe that it's the best place for them or that it's a place that they even want to live. Let's listen to this other clip here of Bill Maher just a few years ago at the beginning of the Trump presidency.
With Betsy DeVos and fucking Rick Perry.
She wouldn't have a Muslim ban.
They wouldn't have a Muslim ban. They wouldn't be feuding with everybody in the world. They wouldn't be doing this shit with Russia. Are you crazy?
Calm down, Bill. There is no Muslim ban. If there was,
fuck off.
Sorry, why don't we
fuck off?
Okay.
It's a fucking Muslim ban.
Okay.
He said there was a Muslim
This is the point. This isn't talk about the hysteria. I'm talking about 85% of the world's Muslims are allowed into the country.
This is what you do, Pierce. You say, he hasn't done this, he hasn't done that, he's not going to do all these things. Give him a fucking chance, mate.
And
you know what I mean?
Why not?
Hitler didn't kill the Jews on the first day. He worked up to it.
Mate.
All right.
So that was at the beginning. That was at the beginning of the Trump presidency, where he wanted to actually limit immigration from countries that had a culture that thought that America should die and that death should come to America and Americans, as the case may be. And he had a very different position then. Why? Well, because it was, listen, again, I'm not saying that the guy can't change. I'm just saying that, man, it's hilarious that when people like this that don't put a lot of thought, like Bill Maher, like I've watched some of his other podcasts, and he's kind of like, he's just this like, well, if he was, he's just the stoner uncle. That's really what he is, right? Like, he's just this guy. He's kind of floated through life. Not saying he's not talented. He's obviously funny by a lot of people's estimation. So I'm not saying he doesn't have talent. I'm just saying, in terms of his place within the symphony of human society, he's the stoner uncle. He's the guy that comes by for, like, for this thing or that. He comes to the party. He slips you a beer because he thinks it's cool. But he doesn't have any children. He's not married. He's not somebody he is, through his actions, signaling that he doesn't have the same concern for the future that other people do. Not a criticism, just an observation. You need the cool uncle in many cases. It's a role that should be filled, I think, within many families. But here we have this direct confrontation, and the funny part about this is, again, the focus here on Muslim immigration in particular. Now, why do we have all these Muslims in this country who want to chant death to America? Okay, yeah, fine. It's a political slogan. It doesn't mean exactly what you want it to mean. Fine. Why are they here? In part, they're here because American policy has allowed them to come here. And part of that American policy has been destabilizing where they're from by completely destroying their home nations and saying, well, guess what? We're going to bomb all this. And it's okay. It doesn't matter that your house there because you can come to America and you can live a lower middle class lifestyle or, a lower class lifestyle, and it's still going to be better. And these ideas have consequences. Policies have consequences. And I think one of the hallmarks of liberalism is that it doesn't want to hold itself to any of the consequences that it has. If it did, if it was a self-correcting system, if it didn't require all of us to give all of our effort to hold it up, if it was self-correcting, it wouldn't be so unstable. So American policy, government policy has allowed millions of these people to enter the country, and we see the consequence of it. As I'm recording this, it is a few days after I think Israel struck an embassy in Syria, and Iran's embassy in Syria, and so then Iran then struck a consulate or launched missiles at Israel. They kind of like let Turkey know to tell. It's like, hey, it's like literally this is geopolitics. Sometimes it's like tell Bobby to tell Susie to tell Jamie that I don't want to talk to her anymore, right? Because like Iran told Turkey to tell the U.S. to say, hey, guess what? We're going to do this, and we're going to do it on a Sunday so that it doesn't affect the markets. You can fact check me on that. Right? And that happens a lot of times with these kinds of strikes that then blast across the headlines of everything. And you're like, oh my God, war is coming. The world is ending. It's not so simple. So Bill Maher has quite recently, I think, become a disaffected liberal. He's suddenly taking, clearing the smoke-filled haze that surrounds his head and being like, you guys are kind of crazy. And in general, it has to do with the race stuff and the gender stuff. But those are the only two things he doesn't want. He wants an America of 20 years ago. He wants the America where he can go out and do an entire documentary making fun of religious people. That's the world he wants. Where he goes wrong, again, I think, is like, because he doesn't see he doesn't see the problems in his own thing. He says, I haven't changed. The world has changed. Yeah, the world changes, and so do we. That's part of who we are as people. So I have to enter in this next point of conversation here, which is this very nebulous boogeyman term that's being thrown out there, namely Christian nationalism. Like a lot of things, like a lot of nebulous and kind of out there terminology, it kind of means what you want it to mean. So like if I'm a Christian, which is to say I believe in the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, if I believe he is the Son of God, then that makes me a Christian. And depending on who you ask, I'll get into the formal definitions here in a second, but if I'm somebody who believes in my country, and I believe that my country should focus on its countrymen and women, the people of the country, the governed on whose consent the government allegedly relies upon, if I'm one of those, that you should put the country first, many would call that nationalism. Now, historically speaking, nationalism has a lot to do with protectionism. It has a lot to do with trying to keep up this particular culture of a place and time, and it in fact flies in the face, even though it is a derivation of, it still is a reaction to liberalism. It's a reaction to liberalism, but only insofar as it's like, well, I want it to be about the thing that I was raised with. I don't want us to all be mushed up into one thing. So there's this nebulous term being thrown around called Christian nationalism. Here's one of the things that I think is happening. I think one of the reasons why so many of us have, I've never been an atheist, as I've talked about on the show, but over the last few years in particular, I find myself returning to my faith in a very real and a very new sense. It was a thing. It was how I was raised, and it's where I'm returning to. But for the people who did think of but there's a lot of people who thought of themselves as atheists for a long time who have found faith for the first time. And I think and there's other people who haven't necessarily had some sort of life-changing experience with the divine, but who still recognize the importance, even what's his face? Richard Dawkins, right? The super duper atheist guy has said that he considers himself something of a cultural Christian. Let's not belabor ourselves by breaking down what these things mean. I just want to focus on this idea of Christian nationalism as it's being put forward. And again, it's kind of a nebulous boogeyman term that a lot of the disaffected libs are putting out because they're worried about what's going to come next. Because they want to return to 1995, and there's other people who are saying that's not good enough. So this is a guy, Colin Wright. Colin, if you see this, I think you do a lot of good work. I think your scientific exploration of gender and race and the biological reality of humans is normally spot on. But Colin tweeted out a quote, Christian nationalism is not and has never been a threat, followed by, quote, they fear Christians uniting, the time is now, Christ is king. And he said, that sounds awfully threatening. And he's responding, he has a picture here of a Candace Owens tweet who said, who says, the quote, Christian nationalism is not and has never been a threat. Our country has collapsed because people who despise Christ removed him from the classrooms that encouraged atheism and never-ending Protestant sects in his place. They lied about everything, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Bolsheviks, all of it. This is good news, by the way, because it reveals how much they fear Christians uniting. The time is now, Christ is king. So a lot of us, including myself, have said this phrase, Christ is king. Of course, Christ is king. His kingdom is not of this earth, but he is still king, and he has dominion over us all. And a lot of the disaffected libs have responded. Like, you can spot a disaffected lib as somebody who is pretty good on gender ideology and racial ideology, but who recoils at any sort of mentioning of a renewal of Christian virtue and Christian ideas. So Candace Owens, in her tweet here, she says, here's why things are messed up, right? It's because you moved the center of the thing that actually kept everything working for all this time. And that center is Christ, because he is eternal. He is the eternal truth. He is the Word made flesh. If you're a Christian, I don't need to explain these things to you. And if you're not, let me know. I'm happy to expound upon these things in another forum. They lied to us about the Crusades. We call the rise of Christianity in our post-Enlightenment society, we call the rise of Christendom the Dark Ages, because it has to do with the fall of the Roman Empire. Of course, those ages weren't so dark, and in fact, there were many a splendor of human thought and flourishing that occurred there. But yes, there was in fact a breakdown of a global order, and the thing that held everybody together was the church, Christianity, Catholicism. You know, yes, the schisms, blah blah blah, but the church, that is what held people together. And as we marched through history together, we became richer, we became more prosperous, we became more comfortable. And when we became more comfortable, some people thought, well, maybe I don't need this thing. Maybe I don't need this thing that's at the center. By the way, this is, let's pause for a second. I'm not talking about legitimate questioning. I have this conversation with a friend of mine quite often. He is, and I say, and I pay it as a compliment to him, is he is one of the only atheists I've met in my life who is legitimately concerned with the question of whether or not a God exists, whether or not the divine is real. Pretty much everyone else I know who is an atheist, both personally or through the consumption of content, have this sense, this aura about them that is like they're really reacting against the strictures of religion. They're reacting against the constraints of religion or religious worldview places on you in our modern secular day, influenced by liberalism. They're really more angry at dad than they are grappling with the question of whether or not there is an eternal God who created us in his image, who loves us unconditionally, and who wants us to be with him forever. That's not what most atheism is. Most atheism is kind of this like, and I think that's one of the reasons why so many people are running away from it, but like most atheism is like this sneering faux intellectualism that pretends that no religious thinker has ever said anything of note, or that there isn't truth to be found in a book like the Bible. And that it's only because of society's imposition of religion on us that we even think religiously or have religious beliefs. Of course, it's a very foolish notion, but let's not belabor the point. We're here to talk about disaffected libs. So I highlight this Colin Wright quote because I think it's a good litmus test. And there's a reason why. Look, do I think everybody who said Christ is king on X and other social media platforms are doing it for the right reasons? No. Do I think that it's better for them to say that than other things? Yes. Why? Because it's true. No more, no less. Another player in this, and again, Peter, if you see this, I like a lot of what you do, but I think you got this one exactly wrong, is Peter Boghossian. Peter Boghossian was somebody who was very much caught up in this intellectual dark web. He was a professor of philosophy. He basically stood up and said reason should be at the center of our existence, something that I would agree with, not the center, but close to the center, certainly. Reason is what we have as humans to try and interpret the world, so we must use it. And he's kind of like gone out and he's done this cool Socratic thing where he does a lot of man on the street stuff. He talks to different people. He tries to reason with them to try and get them to change their minds. Well and good. There's a place for him. But he had this weird take where, okay, so you'll see now there was this tweet from the Publica saying that a gay politician in Spain has abruptly resigned from his post after photos began to circulate showing him eating his own feces. Ew. It says Daniel Gomez de Barrio was a counselor with the governing left-wing party, as you might imagine. Peter quote tweeted somebody else saying, is there a flag and a pronoun for this? Kind of ha 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 funny. But he said, unpopular opinion. And so he understands that he's taking an unpopular opinion. He says, mind your own business and leave this guy alone. Now, of course, what I had to say to him was like, this guy's a politician. He deserves everything that he gets because he put himself out in the public view. If this was just some crazy guy in the middle of nowhere and there was an article about this, I'd be like, oh, wow, there's some crazy guy in the middle of nowhere who eats his own poop. But this is a guy who decided to run for office in our liberal system. He decided to put himself as a member of the elected representatives that shapes policy and procedure for things going forward. And I don't think we should have somebody like that running things. I don't think we should have somebody like that anywhere near the levers of power. I'd much prefer to have somebody with a normal sex drive who might sleep around a little too much, but at least they don't eat their poop. That you would do something like this. Like, the psychology of this is so obvious, right? It's like you're literally debasing yourself. You're eating the thing that nobody eats. To the core of who we are as people, we understand that excrement and feces are not to be consumed because it's waste. This is literally the parts of the parts of everything you eat that you can't do anything with, so your body craps it out. And we're supposed to leave this guy alone? I don't think so. Should he get some help? Probably. But I don't think there's anything wrong with piling on somebody like this. But it's weird that the disaffected lib does. And he says, he quote tweeted that and he said, the comments here are not only authoritarian, they demonstrate pervasive and normative rigidity that comes from a Christian fear of judgment, the downside of Western supremacy mindset. The comments here are not merely authoritarian. Now, authoritarian is another one of these nebulous terms that we use that don't actually mean anything. And I was somebody who would have argued differently a few years ago. But like, we put like the modern political compass puts like authoritarianism on one side, or authoritarianism at the top, libertarianism at the bottom. So authoritarianism is like Like, I'm going to tell you what to do. Libertarianism is you can do what you want to do. But if we just take the word by itself, like, what's the root? It's like this like fancy word that we put ism at the end of, but what's the root of it? The root of it is authority. And of course, in any aspect of our lives, you can't actually do anything without some kind of authority. You could be your own authority on something, but you can't learn everything. That's literally impossible for a human being to do. So you have to rely on other people's authority in order to do anything in this world. And that goes for business and politics alike. So they're authoritarian because we want to say this guy shouldn't eat poop. Maybe, I'm not sure. I might be flippantly responding to this, but certainly I can understand that from what he's saying here. And then he says they demonstrate pervasive normative rigidity. So pervasive meaning it encompasses everything. A normative rigidity, which says we want people to be normal. We want people in certain jobs to fall into a certain stricture, like not eating their poop if they're elected representatives. And that comes from the Christian fear of judgment. That's actually a weird turn of phrase. Let's see if does he qualify this at all? No, he doesn't qualify this at all. Christians don't fear judgment. Fear is used in the Christian sense in terms of awe. It is if you are standing, right? If you're in the middle of the ocean, if you find yourself in the middle of the ocean, or if you find yourself on the plains of the Western United States, let's say, and you're standing there and you start to feel the electricity in the air, and you start to see that there's a storm rolling in, it fills you with a certain sense, a sense of fear because storms are dangerous, but also this sense of awe. And that's what the Christian notion of fear is. It's not cowering per se. It is a recognition of something greater than oneself. And he says this is the downside of the Western supremacy mindset. I don't know of any non-Western country that believes that eating your poop is okay. So perhaps he's expounded upon this elsewhere. If I ever find that and I feel like it's worth bringing up to you, I'm going to bring it up to you again. But again, I'm just pointing out to you here again, the marker of a disaffected lib is somebody who, generally speaking, is good on racial and gender issues while reacting negatively to basic Christian norms and ethics. Part of this comes from what a lot of people interpret Christianity to be. Part of this comes from Martin Luther and his consequences, which is to say, as Candace kind of pointed out in her tweet, is this never-ending breaking down of Christianity into new and new sects that the Protestants deal with, right? Like Protestantism is not a unifying idea. It is the collection of a bunch of ideas which have a lot of disagreement within it, whereas the church, Catholicism, and our Eastern brethren, we have very much the same view of things. There are differences within that, but they all hold the same thing at its center. So if you think about it like this, if like God is in the center, I would say those first couple circles are Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, if you will. And then beyond that, we have this, like, it's kind of like they're like Mercury and Venus rotating the earth. They're very close, very quick. Whereas like all the various Protestant denominations are kind of like spinning out from the circle, and some of those denominations fly off and they're not caught in the gravitational pull anymore. And those are the people that like do Marvel interpretations of the Easter. I don't know. I've seen some crazy stuff online, let me tell you, but that's not what this episode is about. So I don't really know. And I don't see him. Okay, let's see. He says, I see this is a response he has to this. I see the authoritarians are out en masse. If one of his constituents, and again, here we go, the commitment to liberalism is right here. If his constituents disapprove, they will vote him out. Meanwhile, I'm sure there are more substantive issues which you could have a conniption fit and finger wave. First of all, we can do both. We can talk about more substantive issues, and we can also point a finger wave. The guy's eating his poop. What world would you say that we shouldn't worry about that? That is worrisome behavior. And it's a sign of the times that somebody like that can find their way into any kind of political power. Any kind of political power. Next one, we've got Adam Crigler. Adam Crigler, I believe, formerly, let me make sure. Who is this guy? I'm pretty sure, yeah. I'm pretty sure this guy used to be on Timcast. Hopefully I'm right about that. This guy used to be on Timcast, used to work with Tim Pool. They had a falling out of some kind. He went out and kind of did his own thing, but he was like a super duper Trump guy before Tim Pool was, and he kind of pulled Tim Pool towards the Trump train, if you will. So they're kind of going out, and he's saying that the pendulum is swinging too far the other way. Why? Because the Louisiana House passed a bill to require classrooms that receive state funding to display the 10 Commandments. Again, we see this visceral reaction to anything moderately Christian, even in a cultural sense. Name me what aspect of the 10 Commandments is a problem. I'll wait. No? Nothing? I didn't think so either. So why is it that people react against it? Because their aversion is actually to Christianity in and of itself. But I belabor my point. All of these people, and there's more out there, I feel bad for them in a sense, because they are trying to hold on to something that I don't think can exist. Because to use a Bible parable, because the foundation of it is in sand. It is not a strong foundation for a society. It might have worked for a time, but clearly we're seeing the fractures in this foundation all around us. I try to talk about them on my show and on my Twitter, on my X timeline, in my writing, all of these places, and I hope you start to see them too. So do me a favor. If you like this episode, go to beenawake.com, subscribe with your email address. If you really like this episode, if you want to hear more of what I have to say, consider becoming a premium member. If you go, I'm actually on Patreon and Locals. You can subscribe there as well if that's the platform you use. You don't get as many benefits, but the cost to entry is a lot lower. You'll get the feed, you'll get all that kind of stuff. But if you go to the Substack, which is currently the home for my monetization, I also post the articles on X by themselves. You can find this on YouTube. Just search Been Awake with LB. You'll find it. But let me make this pitch. If you like this conversation, buy me dinner. That's how much it costs for a year at beenawake.com. You're gonna get that discount going forward as long as you buy it this year. I'm gonna do that every election year, I think. You're gonna get that discount forever. But it's $50 for your first year. I think you'll really enjoy it. And when you do that, it signals to me that I should keep the mission of better sense making going. So do me a favor, beenawake.com, subscribe with your email address, and follow me on all social media at the LB Muniz.
If you like what you heard today, go to beenawake.com to subscribe for future updates. My name is LB Muniz, and I am not one with the woke.